by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what
Queen Camilla believed the crown estate arrangements protecting her future had already been settled. The residences, household funding, and ceremonial privileges appeared secure. Then, during a closed legal review at Buckingham Palace, one palace lawyer turned over a previously sealed page and discovered a signed amendment that changed everything. Within minutes, Camilla was called into a private room. By the time she emerged, her face had lost its color, and the future she trusted no longer existed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The closed door changed everything. Palace lawyers had gathered inside a restricted Buckingham Palace office for a routine review of Crown Estate succession plans. The Crown Estate is the collection of lands and properties managed for the monarch's public duties, not a private fortune. Charles, Camilla, and William were affected, yet none expected a buried command. A senior solicitor lifted a page carrying an older royal seal, stored apart from the main file. The amendment stated that after Charles's reign, Camilla would lose authority over several royal residences, household funds, and estate privileges. William would control those decisions as the next monarch, while Princess Anne would serve as an independent overseer, preventing unchecked action. Camilla entered without her private secretary and sensed danger. The lead lawyer placed the amendment before her, and she read the first page twice. Her hand tightened around the table. Then she looked at Charles and asked why she had never seen it. Charles did not answer. The king lowered his eyes, and that silence struck harder than the legal language. Camilla expected confusion or outrage. Instead, she saw recognition. Her husband knew more than he would say, and she felt the room shift beneath her. The signature destroyed hope that the document was an abandoned draft. Charles had signed it months earlier, witnessed by 2 senior legal officers. Camilla's household had never received formal notice. She stared at the page, then at the monarch, and understood the instruction remained active, while she believed her future was protected. William had received a confidential summary that morning, because the amendment gave him future power. The prince was no longer an observer. His approval could determine where Camilla lived, which privileges she kept, and how much authority remained. Camilla rose without another question. In the corridor, she heard Charles ask the lawyers to remain. The door closed. One thought followed the queen consort. If her husband had signed the amendment, what forced him to do it? The wound would come from learning how many others knew the ground beneath her was moving. The hidden amendment did not simply alter property arrangements. It exposed the private fears of 4 people bound together by marriage, succession, loyalty, and mistrust. Camilla feared humiliation. Charles feared the collapse of the family he had fought to preserve. William feared inheriting another unresolved royal crisis. Anne feared that sentiment had once again been allowed to weaken the crown. Each entered the dispute carrying a different burden, and none was prepared to surrender. Camilla sat with the amendment open before her. She removed her reading glasses, placed them beside the page, and whispered that years beside the king had left her feeling like a temporary guest inside her own marriage. The threat reached beyond residences and funding. It challenged the security she believed service and loyalty had earned. William carried a different fear. At Windsor, he told Catherine that the amendment would eventually force him to decide what his father's wife could keep. He did not welcome that power. Generosity might weaken his reign, while strict enforcement could make him look cruel and vindictive. Charles tried to protect both sides. During a private exchange, the king told Camilla that duty required safeguards because crown estate arrangements could not rest on personal promises. The crown estate meant lands and properties managed to support the monarch's public role, not assets to be promised without limit. She answered that duty had become the word he used whenever he refused to explain himself. Anne refused to soften the danger. When Charles asked her to speak gently with Camilla, the princess closed her folder and said kindness could not mean trapping William with decisions made before he reached the throne. The monarch heard the warning, but he also heard the judgment beneath it. Camilla began connecting the names around the document. Anne had been appointed overseer. William had been briefed. Palace lawyers had acted in silence. The queen consort started to believe the amendment was not a safeguard, but a coordinated campaign designed to keep her household uninformed until resistance became impossible. Catherine saw the suspicion growing. She told William that silence would be read as guilt and urged him to speak before others defined his role. The prince agreed, Yet his reply exposed something deeper. He knew why the amendment had been created, and he feared saying it aloud. One phrase changed everything. Camilla, passing the adjoining corridor, heard Anne tell Charles that none of this would have happened without the Sandringham Memorandum. She stopped. The words pulled her back to a winter confrontation the family had buried. To understand why Charles signed such a devastating restriction, they would have to return to Sandringham, where trust finally broke. Months before the lawyers opened the sealed file, a private meeting at Sandringham had already placed the monarchy on a collision course. It began with a disagreement over one royal residence, and ended with an ultimatum no one in the room could forget. Charles attempted to calm the argument. William refused to retreat. Camilla demanded certainty. Anne watched every word harden into consequence. By nightfall, a memorandum had been ordered, and the hidden amendment had begun to take shape. Camilla's request had sounded practical at first. Her household wanted written confirmation that she would retain long-term use of 2 royal properties, expanded staffing, and control over private entertaining budgets after Charles's death. Those guarantees mattered because they would protect her life and public standing. Yet William saw language broad enough to bind the next reign before it began. William demanded limits. The prince insisted that every future arrangement remain subject to the reigning monarch, meaning the sovereign who holds authority at that time. He argued that no outgoing household should control crown-supported resources forever. Camilla heard something colder, a warning that he intended to reduce her position the moment he became king. January 18 became the breaking point. During a private dinner at Sandringham, Camilla pushed a typed memorandum across the table and asked Charles to sign immediately. Before the king could reach it, William placed his hand over the paper. "No promise made tonight can command the next reign," he said. Camilla froze. Anne and Catherine heard every word, and the queen consort felt corrected before the family. She turned to Charles and demanded his support. When he asked for more time, she rose so sharply that her chair struck the floor. Then she left without looking back. Charles remained with the unsigned guarantee before him. The monarch admitted to Anne that he could not burden William with obligations the future king considered unworkable. Yet he feared that rejecting Camilla would confirm her deepest suspicion, that acceptance beside him had always been temporary. Anne offered the answer in a documented note attached to the meeting record. The princess recommended a confidential legal amendment with clear limits and independent oversight. William resisted receiving special authority, but Charles decided uncertainty would create a worse crisis later. He ordered palace council to prepare it in strict secrecy. Now Camilla held that same memorandum. Her private secretary had obtained the archived copy, and Anne's handwritten recommendation appeared on the final page. Grief hardened into fury. She no longer wanted lawyers. She wanted Charles, William, and Anne together. The amendment had become proof, in her mind, that 3 people closest to the crown had decided her future without her. When Camilla entered the king's private library, no aides followed her, and no cameras waited beyond the door. Charles stood near the fireplace. William remained beside the long table. Anne sat with the amendment closed beneath one hand. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Camilla placed the Sandringham memorandum in front of them and asked a question that cut through every royal title in the room. "Which one of you decided I could no longer be trusted?" Camilla had demanded the meeting without lawyers or private secretaries. She wanted no shield of procedure between them. The Sandringham memorandum was the written record of the winter meeting where the dispute had begun, and every name in that room now carried part of its weight. Charles tried to narrow the damage. The king said the amendment concerned future crown estate governance, meaning the rules controlling royal lands and resources after his reign, not her value or present position. Camilla rejected the distinction. A decision affecting her home, staff, and dignity could not be dismissed as administration. Camilla turned on William. She accused the prince of using succession to punish her for wounds that had never healed. He stayed controlled and said he would not inherit private guarantees that restricted his ability to govern. His calmness sounded rehearsed, and that made her anger burn harder. Anne refused to become the silent villain. When Camilla called the oversight clause personal hostility, the princess pushed back her chair and stood. She said Charles had been pressured to promise resources that did not belong solely to him, and someone had to protect the next reign from promises it never made. Charles then opened a second file. The monarch explained that Camilla's proposal contained automatic renewals, extended staffing protections, and access rights for selected members of her family. She stared at him and insisted she had never approved such language. The discovery shifted the room. A documented legal comparison showed that Camilla's former senior private secretary had expanded the original request before sandering him. The aide had added protections for residences, household budgets, and family access, without clearly explaining their reach. Camilla realized her fear had been turned into a demand for permanent power. Charles acknowledged that she may not have understood the altered proposal. Still, the king refused to withdraw the amendment. He set his pen down and said the monarchy could not return to uncertainty simply because certainty had arrived through pain. William watched her expression change, while Anne remained standing, and neither offered comfort because the decision had already moved beyond apology or regret. Camilla had exposed the manipulation, but his refusal revealed where the real power now rested. The confrontation exposed a distorted proposal, but it did not destroy the amendment. That was the moment Camilla understood the harshest truth of royal power. Proving she had been misled did not restore what had already been taken from her. The decision now belonged to a narrow circle of legal authority, constitutional duty, and future sovereignty. Charles could soften the language. Anne could adjust the oversight. But William alone represented the reign for which the safeguards had been written. Palace Council confirmed the document remained valid. Charles had signed it freely, the appointed witnesses had verified it, and the clauses governed crown-supported assets rather than Camilla's personal property. A signed instrument was a formal legal document carrying royal authority. Reversing it would require another instrument and William's written acknowledgement because any replacement could restrict the monarch he would one day become. William did not yet control those plans, but his future discretion stood at their center. The prince understood that permanent guarantees made now could bind his reign before it began. His consent therefore carried more than legal weight. It would decide whether personal compassion could override the freedom of the next sovereign. Night deepened over Windsor. William sat alone with the amendment open before him, reading Camilla's name and then his father's signature. He closed his eyes. Victory brought no satisfaction. The future king looked burdened by the knowledge that his reign was already demanding decisions capable of wounding his family. Catherine entered quietly and studied his face. She asked whether he wanted justice or distance. William admitted he could not separate the amendment from years of tension. She answered that his strongest choice would be one he could defend, even if none of that painful history existed. The princess left him with a harder standard than anger. Charles arrived later with a private request. The king asked William to guarantee Camilla one secure residence and a defined household allowance. He agreed she must never be abandoned, yet he refused unchecked control over multiple properties, funds, or ceremonial support. William then authorized palace lawyers to draft a compromise. Camilla would receive lifetime use of one designated home, personal security, and a protected household budget. Broader privileges, additional residences, and ceremonial funding would remain subject to the reigning monarch, the sovereign holding authority at that time. Charles carried the revised agreement to Camilla himself. She read every line, reached the signature page, and placed the pen beside it without writing her name. Her silence left the king staring at a choice that could still ignite the palace. The crown had offered Camilla security without control, but accepting it meant surrendering the future Charles had promised. By morning, the hidden amendment had begun changing daily life inside the palace. Meetings were canceled. Household officers stopped receiving instructions. Property schedules were frozen, while lawyers reviewed every future commitment. Camilla had not signed the compromise, yet the machinery around her was already adjusting to its terms. The queen consort, once surrounded by certainty, watched officials carry locked files from her office, and understood that power rarely disappears with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes, it vanishes desk by desk. Palace officials moved first. They suspended every new long-term crown estate commitment linked to Camilla's household, including renovation approvals, staffing extensions, and future residence allocations. The crown estate meant the lands and properties supporting the monarch's public duties, and any promise attached to it could restrict William's next reign. Until Camilla signed or challenged the compromise, nothing could move. Quiet division followed. Senior aides who had served Camilla for years argued that loyalty deserved stronger protection. Others believed William's limits were necessary because no future king should inherit private obligations he never approved. Their disagreement spread through offices, dining rooms, and whispered conversations that stopped whenever Charles entered. Camilla felt the change directly. She entered her working office and found 2 document cabinets sealed for legal inventory. When she asked who had authorized it, a household officer named Central Palace Counsel. The Queen removed her gloves slowly, told him to continue, and waited until he left before allowing her eyes to fill. Charles arrived without warning. The king found Camilla beside an untouched tray of tea and said the compromise protected her dignity. She looked at him and answered that dignity offered after control had been removed felt like consolation, not respect. He tried to respond, but she turned away. The leak began with a junior employee noticing estate orders marked for urgent review. The amendment remained sealed, yet fragments reached a political editor who started asking why Camilla's future property arrangements had suddenly been frozen. One careless answer could turn a family dispute into a national spectacle. Anne then learned through a documented legal briefing that Camilla's advisor had drafted a private objection. Filing it could expose palace correspondence, the Sandringham confrontation, and Charles' divided loyalties, even if it failed to defeat the amendment. Camilla did not authorize it. Instead, she summoned William to Clarence House and demanded that no lawyers, aides, Anne, or Charles attend. For once, she wanted neither procedure nor protection, only an honest answer from the man who would eventually control the future she feared losing. With the palace bracing for public war, Camilla prepared to learn whether William saw her as a duty to protect or an enemy to remove. There were no lawyers at Clarence House, no sealed folders, and no sovereign seated between them. Camilla waited beside the window while William entered alone. She did not offer him the formal chair prepared for royal meetings. Instead, she pointed toward a smaller table where 2 cups of tea had gone cold. For the first time since the amendment was uncovered, neither spoke as queen consort nor future king. They spoke as 2 people whose lives had been shaped by the same family wounds. Camilla spoke first. She told William that her demand for guarantees had come from one fear: becoming disposable after Charles's death. Titles and public respect had never erased the knowledge that much of the country still viewed her place in the family as conditional. The Queen admitted she wanted certainty before grief removed the one person who had always defended her. William listened without interrupting. The prince said he had never intended to leave her homeless, humiliated, or forgotten. He feared inheriting promises that would force him either to surrender authority or publicly overrule his father. A future sovereign is the monarch who will hold the crown next, and he wanted clear limits before loss made every decision look cruel. Camilla then asked the question both had avoided. Could he truly separate the amendment from Diana? William paused. He said he could not erase the past or pretend it had not shaped him, but he refused to govern through it. His honesty wounded her, yet it was the first answer she fully believed. Camilla lowered her eyes and admitted her own failure. She had pushed Charles for certainty without examining how the proposal might bind William. She had also allowed a private secretary to turn personal fear into a demand for permanent institutional power. The confession cost her pride, but it changed the room. William answered with a pledge. He would add a written commitment protecting Camilla's chosen residence, security, personal staff, and ceremonial respect for life. Ceremonial respect meant the honors and public treatment attached to her royal position. The promise would protect her dignity without granting control over crown assets. Silence held them for several seconds. Camilla opened a drawer, removed the prepared legal objection, and tore the unsigned final page in half. She told William she would accept the compromise, not because she had lost, but because she finally understood the line between personal protection and inherited power. William warned that the leak could no longer be contained. Camilla said the palace should confirm the revised arrangement instead of denying it. The private war had ended across cold tea, but the world was about to judge them both. At 6 the next morning, the secret crossed the palace gates. London awoke to a royal dispute no statement could fully disguise. A hidden amendment, restricted estate privileges, and a queen consort forced to renegotiate her future. Commentators called it a power struggle. Supporters called it responsible planning. Critics called it a humiliation. Yet one image captured the public mood more clearly than any debate: Camilla entering Buckingham Palace alone, while hundreds watched in absolute silence. Buckingham Palace answered with restraint. Its statement confirmed that future residential and financial arrangements had been clarified by mutual agreement. The palace called the framework responsible stewardship, meaning careful management of royal property and public resources. But it avoided every painful detail. the hidden amendment, the Sandringham confrontation, and the private settlement reached between Camilla and William. Broadcasters divided the country before breakfast. Some described William as protecting the freedom of the next reign. Others presented Camilla as a loyal royal figure forced to surrender privileges after discovering that Charles had signed without telling her. Every interpretation carried the same message. The family had survived a struggle no longer contained behind palace walls. One front page captured the shock. The morning edition of the London Chronicle carried a full-width photograph of Camilla leaving the legal meeting, her expression pale beneath her hat. Above it stood 4 words: "The Crown draws the line." Copies rose above the barriers outside Buckingham Palace while television crews broadcast the image across Britain. Camilla arrived for a scheduled engagement and stopped before entering. A supporter called, "We stand with you, Your Majesty." She turned, offered a small nod, and continued inside. The Queen remained composed, but the tightness in her expression revealed how much that dignity cost. William faced a different judgment. Commentators accused the prince of using future authority too harshly. He refused a personal response, yet Catherine found him watching the coverage with his jaw clenched. She reminded him that a necessary boundary could still cause real pain. He did not disagree. The narrative shifted that afternoon. Camilla and William appeared together at a Crown-supported charity reception, an event financed through resources connected to the monarchy's public work. He waited at the entrance. She stepped beside him rather than behind. Their unity confirmed the settlement had been accepted. Anne arrived first, carrying the original file and refusing to reopen old accusations. Charles then summoned Camilla, William, Catherine, and Anne for one final private gathering. The king intended to define the amendment, assign responsibility, and close the wound permanently. Public judgment had turned humiliation into a test of unity, leaving Charles one final duty: transform a painful settlement into a lasting family decision. The final meeting contained no accusations and no hidden pages. The amendment lay openly on the table, beside the compromise Camilla had now signed. Charles looked at his wife, his son, his sister, and the future queen, knowing each had been wounded by the process. Yet the crisis had achieved what years of careful silence never could. It had separated love from authority, protection from control, and personal loyalty from the responsibilities of the crown. Nothing remained to be concealed. Camilla accepted the settlement. She would retain one residence, full security, a protected household allowance, and ceremonial standing. Ceremonial standing meant the honors and public respect connected to her royal position. In return, the Queen surrendered control over additional Crown estate properties, discretionary funds, and future staffing decisions. William signed an acknowledgement. The prince confirmed that his reign would honor Camilla's protections while preserving authority over Crown-supported resources. Neither side could rewrite the agreement after Charles was gone. Security had been guaranteed, but permanent control had not. Charles faced his wife and admitted the cost of secrecy. The king said he should have discussed the amendment before signing. He had believed silence would delay conflict, yet it had deepened her betrayal. He apologized for the method without withdrawing the principle, because duty still required a clear boundary. Camilla answered with quiet resolve. She might never forget discovering that her future had been discussed without her. Still, she accepted that the monarchy could not be inherited with private obligations attached to it. The Queen closed the legal folder herself, making clear that she would not reopen the fight. Anne accepted a reduced role. The princess would intervene only if a future dispute arose, because Camilla and William had reached a direct agreement. She told the Queen that oversight had never meant to diminish her, only to stop uncertainty from becoming warfare. The meeting ended without celebration. Charles reached for Camilla's hand. William opened the door but waited. She stepped through beside the king, then looked back at the prince. Their restrained nod carried neither affection nor defeat. It carried recognition. The amendment shattered Camilla because it exposed how fragile her security remained. Yet by accepting protection without permanent control, she preserved her dignity. William protected the sovereignty he would inherit, and Charles kept faith with both his marriage and the crown. The hidden amendment did not end Camilla's place within the monarchy. It defined it, protected it, and freed the next reign from a conflict that might otherwise have torn the family apart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.